Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Green Tea Podcast. All right, today we have a special episode on Sagittarius season. So, everything about Sagittarius and how we, each one of us, can relate to Sagittarius. So, Emma, can you take it from here, what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sagittarius season this year runs from November 21st to December 21st. And there are tons of themes that fall under Sagittarius energy, but some things that we're going to focus on today mainly revolve around Sagittarius's desire to learn. It's a sign that sees life through the lens of perspectives of subjectivity and like belief systems. And another thing that's related to this is philosophy, right? So Sag energy can help us to really understand like the value of our own life philosophy, having our own set of like rules and whatever that we live by. Um, and also in that regard obviously open ourselves up to understanding that other people have different worldviews or different life philosophies. Now Sagittarius is a fire sign as well, and fire is all about action. So Sagittarius takes action not only in the direction of learning, but also taking action in the direction of like adventure, expansion, experience, things like that. And so it understands that traveling is one of the easiest ways to grow and to experience new cultures and expose itself to new worldviews. So those are, I think some things that are a great place to start with Sagittarius.
I love that. Whenever I think of Sagittarius, it reminds me of our mutual friend Yumi because she's a strong Sag. Before I even
Yeah.
knew her, she's like, I want to travel. She's always traveling. She's always optimistic. We would ask her harsh questions like, what if somebody backstabbed you and betrayed you? And she's like, I don't care. I throw them away. And she's so
Yeah.
optimistic. And I'm like, and I just found out she's a Sagittarius.
Yeah, absolutely. She there's so much about her energy that I feel is so Sagittarian in nature. I know you mentioned optimism, and optimism is another trait or characteristic of Sagittarius. And yeah, there are people who understand that, you know, um harping on the negatives or on the pain of the past is not necessarily productive or helpful. It doesn't lead to necessarily feeling any better or seizing life, if you will, seizing the day. So yeah, I totally get what you mean. It's funny how she's
Yeah.
very Sagittarian.
But on the contrary, I know I've told you this. I met somebody who was an Aries, and I'm like, to me, Aries are fiery people. They're leaders, they're initiators. But I was like,
Yeah.
this person doesn't seem like an Aries coming up front. So sometimes the sun sign doesn't represent exactly their upfront personality, right?
Yes, so there can be many reasons why somebody isn't embodying the characteristics of Aries as strongly as maybe someone else. One of those reasons is like, let's say that this person is a sun in Aries, but if you look at the rest of their chart, say that there's nothing else in Aries, then Aries is actually one of the least strong energies in their chart. Some other things that could impact this would be looking at the aspects to the sun sign. So let's say that there's the sun in Aries and it's forming like, I don't know, a square or something to Mars, which is how you assert yourself. It's the planet that's actually also naturally ruled by Aries. It could indicate, a square could indicate that there's tension between the two, and maybe the way that you express yourself and the way that you take action, there's a clash almost of like these two sides of you, and maybe one of them like wins out more than the other. Yeah, there's tons of reasons, why like you might not embody that energy, even if that is, which is why I think it's important for everybody to look at their full chart if you have that information, to look it up, because you'll get to see that you really are a multifaceted individual, and there might be signs and placements that contradict each other or conflict with one another. And sometimes I think that seeing that laid out for yourself can actually be quite validating, because you realize like, oh wow, this internal conflict that I feel, it's not like wrong that I feel this. Like there's a whole planet and placement that suggests that I might feel this way. It's easier to accept, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, but I think most people, when I pull up my charts, I don't know how to read that. It's like Pluto,
Mhm.
something, something, something. I'm like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
We need like a professional like you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah, so
complicated. Yeah.
it is. So I guess to get started, are there any Sagittarius placements in us, the host, you and I? And what does that mean for us so that other people can try and read their charts?
Sure. So for your chart, I'm pretty sure you don't have anything in Sagittarius. I actually have 4 planets in Sagittarius. So it's funny because I'm an Aquarius, but if you look at the rest of my chart, depending on the way that you calculate it, you could say that my dominant archetype is actually Sagittarius. So I might appear or come off into the world more as a Sagittarius than an Aquarius.
Mhm.
Um, So I think, firstly, it depends largely on which placements you have in Sagittarius. It could change the way that it's manifested, or in what area of your life or way of being that you see it. So to give you an example, one of the things that I have in Sagittarius is moon. I have the moon in Sagittarius, and the moon is all about your inner emotional needs, what you need to feel nurtured, what provides you a sense of safety, but also it could be like unconscious patterns that you're not aware of. So I'm somebody who, for example, feels very nurtured by freedom and expansion, growth, learning, sure, all that stuff, and travel. And I really don't like to feel like stuck in one place or trapped. Like the word trapped is like, it makes me like feel funny physically because I really hate that feeling of like I can't escape or go somewhere else. I remember when COVID happened, I was like, oh my gosh, what if like the world never opens back up again and like we can't travel? I was like, I'm gonna have to live here and die here, and this is gonna be crazy. Like it turned into like a real existential worry that I started having. Um, but then to give you like a different example, it, like I said, it could also represent unconscious patterns that we might have. And I know that for a long time, Sagittarius, like I said, it rules belief systems, and belief systems are subjective. You know what I mean? There's not necessarily, some beliefs are not necessarily facts, rooted in fact. They're just your opinion. And so because of that, this is where the concept of right versus wrong comes into play. And when I was definitely like in my early 20s, and definitely when I was younger, I used to have a bit of that, like, I needed to be right about things, and I was really bothered when people didn't agree with me. At some point, obviously, I had to realize that that wasn't necessarily the most productive way of looking at the world. What I had mentioned before about Sagittarius having this very expansive, it has its own life philosophy, but it travels and immerses itself in other life philosophies. The highest embodiment of Sagittarius is somebody who um can live by their own life philosophy, but they also can like amass and touch other ones, and just they want to learn about them, they want to experience them. They're not there to cast judgment upon them and say like, oh, mine is more right and yours is wrong. They're just there to learn and to experience. So that's one of the things like emotionally that I had to learn, was to let go of this need to be so righteous and to be right all the time, or to not fear being wrong.
Yeah. I do think that, like, even before I knew that you had a moon in Sag, that you do give me that feeling of like I don't know, I just see Emma going everywhere. Like you told me that,
Mm,
your future dream is to actually travel backpack also with your future partner. That's such like a Sag
yeah.
character.
Oh my god, yeah, I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting though because, and I know that you don't have any Sagittarius in your chart, but you have Gemini in your chart, and you have Moon. I'm sorry, you have Sun, Mercury, and Venus in Gemini, and Sagittarius and Gemini are actually opposites. So what's kind of funny is Gemini and Sagittarius. When you have opposite signs, it means that like a certain they share something, but they're also opposite for a reason. One of the things that Gemini and Sagittarius shares is a desire to learn. I know that we've used the word like curiosity before, and that's definitely a trait of Gemini. But the difference is that where Gemini likes to learn is more from the mind. It's like rationale, it's logic, it's facts, figures, data, things that can be proved or are rational. Whereas, like I said, Sagittarius is more about learning from a philosophical standpoint. It's like this might not necessarily be true by fact, by science standards, but it's interesting to me, and meaning is interesting, and meaning doesn't necessarily have to be facts based either. So both of them do have this desire to learn and to grow and to expand. And even though Sagittarius rules travel in a more like physical and literal sense, Gemini is very good at traveling amongst the conversation. I know I've mentioned before, like, yeah, like you are able to hit on like a million topics in the course of 30 minutes. It's really insane. It's one of the best qualities about you, in my opinion. But yeah, they're similar in that regard. They have a very flexible, adaptable, versatile mind, and some of the way that they experience that travel is through the faculties of their intelligence and their mind.
That's crazy you say that we travel through the mind. That's
Yeah.
so funny. I sometimes feel
Yeah.
like I always say that I don't have ADHD, but I feel like I do because like I can't stand being in one place, not physically, but my mind. And I
Yeah.
always say my favorite food whenever somebody asks me, it's a buffet because I want to try everything.
Yes.
Or
Oh my
somebody
gosh.
says, what's your favorite boba flavor? I'm like, how do you have one favorite? Every day it's different for
Mm,
me. Like I crave something else. Same goes with my mind. I'm
yeah.
like, I love to do many different careers. I do music, I do this, I do
Yes.
that. So it's like that gives me comfort and a purpose in my life. So
Yes.
just Gemini.
Yes. Oh my God, that's so true. That's spoken like a true Gemini. Multifaceted, you have multiple
Mm,
interests, hard to stay in one place. Actually, that's another thing that Gemini and Sagittarius share can be sometimes this sense or feeling of restlessness and like a need to move or be stimulated in some way,
mm,
which can manifest, not saying it always does, but it can manifest as being easily bored or like not I don't want to say being non-committal, but perhaps at times being non-committal because you're always jumping around to something else,
mm,
whether it's mentally or physically, whatever. Um, so yeah, that's funny. But the positive of that is variety. You know what I mean? So
mhm. Yeah.
yeah,
And one thing that I personally love about Sag that I learned was their eternal optimism. And
yeah,
I'm not sure if this is how every Sag thinks, but I just learned that like a lot of the times we as human beings put meanings to a situation. So if
hmm
you get, for example, I don't know, cheated on or you get fired from your work, well, what's the difference? Are you putting that negative meaning from yourself or would you put a good meaning to it, which results in the outcome? So just like a lot of spiritual gurus say the situation doesn't matter. It's how you feel on the inside that does. So I love the optimism that Sag has. And that's what I'm trying to learn every single day. Whenever I go out, I meet people, whatever happens, like I'm trying to
hmm
take the best lessons from even the worst situations.
right, right. And I think you make a really good point because it highlights the fact that things will happen to us regardless. Like things are just going to happen. And it's how we choose to look at that and what kind of meaning we decide to contrive from that that will kind of determine like how things start to move forward from that point. And yeah, I totally can relate to that. Is there something like in particular in your life that you can think of where you realize that having that more positive mindset or
Mhm.
assigning maybe a more positive meaning to something has helped you?
Yeah, recently. So as you know, I've went through not a lot of relationships in my life, but recently I went through
Mm.
like a bad, I would say the word bad right now, relationship
Yeah,
experience,
sure.
right? So that got me to realize, okay, let me go out and date. So I started to use the apps for the first time. I started to meet a lot of people. And if you see a lot of dating stories on TikTok, Instagram, they're like, oh my God, this guy did this to me and that to me. It was such a bad date. For me, as I'm going out on dates, of course, I'm being very picky, but there's a lot of times when we don't vibe, but each
Mm.
person that I meet, I'm like, wow, I loved characteristic A about this person, but I didn't like about this. So I'm kind of like
Yeah.
taking the good lessons with me and building the archetype
Mm.
of what kind of a husband material that Grace wants. And I don't think we
Mm.
truly dig into that and know who we want until you build that characteristic list. So
Mm.
I went on a date and I was like, wow, this person, I love their emotional side. He was Aquarius actually. And I've never met an
Oh, nice.
Aquarius man on a date before. Yeah. And I'm like, he's
Mhm.
so empathetic. He was so understanding. And not every date's like that in the first dates.
Sure.
Cause like some guys might be, I was really late because something happened from another event, but he was so
Oh,
understanding. And maybe another date would have been mad
mm,
at me, right? But he
sure.
was
Yeah.
so warm and we had a great conversation. And I don't think I see him romantically, but that
Mm.
was a characteristic I was like, wow, I want to put this on the list of the archetype that I'm building. That's actually very important for me. And I met another
Yeah.
date the other time. He seemed physically attractive, but he wasn't empathetic at all, I feel like.
Mm.
So I was like, maybe I don't like that. So each date that I go on, I'm learning more about myself, which I'm taking the very optimistic side to dating.
Yeah. I love that. That's so awesome. And I know that like you and I have had these conversations before too, but I find it really interesting how sometimes, when you're on this path and this journey of getting back into the dating scene, it can be easy sometimes to slip into like that negative thought pattern of like, oh my God, this is like not the guy, or like, oh my God,
Yeah.
why isn't this working out? Or why is, nah, nah. But there's also kind of like the other way to look at it, which is like, oh, I'm just, I don't have that expectation of needing to find the guy like, that first
Mhm.
date. And so instead, I'm just going to let myself experience this and experience what it's like to be amongst these people, and see what I can learn about what I need, so that I don't end up in another relationship that I don't want to be in,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, I
Love that.
appreciate like every single time. Not that I've done this often, but every time I do go out and meet somebody, like I really
Mm.
appreciate their time. And I hope they feel the
Yeah.
same about me and don't have this pressure or expectation that like it has to work out. Or am I wasting my time and money? Like, I just appreciate that this person came out, we got to know each other, and I
Yeah.
hope that person learned more about who they want in life. Maybe it's not
Yeah.
me, maybe it's somebody who's, has a characteristic A about Grace, but not the others.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
just felt so grateful to meet such wonderful people. Like, I've been
Yeah.
picking pretty good people. Not that I
Yeah.
romantically we might fit, but
Yeah.
just so appreciative.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really amazing. I'm really happy to hear that just because of like knowing how much strife you went through, like with especially with the last relationship and
Yeah.
just everything, I don't know. It makes me really happy to hear that like you're having more success and able to look at it like in a different way.
Yeah. How about you? What
Yeah.
can you use about optimism in your life today?
So I think for me, I've put a pretty large focus the past couple of years on like my career and trying to figure things out. And one of the things that I have noticed about myself is I think that I think about things very quickly and I try to come up with solutions for things very quickly. And I can sometimes also take action like relatively quickly. And because of all those things, I also expect things to unfold just as quickly. But sometimes like life doesn't really work that way. And I realize that I had so many expectations about like this getting done like this fast. You know what I mean? And when it didn't happen, I would like immediately lapse into this negative thought pattern of like, oh my God, why is this taking so long? Oh my God, this must be because it's not for me or like da 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 whatever. And then eventually I just kind of realized, like maybe it's not really that. And I'm just putting myself through all this stress and frustration of not having what I want when I want it. And maybe there's like a reason that this is taking a long time. And maybe I should just be more patient. You know what I mean? Like maybe there are things that haven't happened yet that eventually will make me realize through reflection that, like, oh, yeah, if that had come any earlier, I would have totally botched the opportunity, or maybe I just didn't, I'll start building something, but then I get a better idea in the middle of while I'm launching it. And so even just making that shift for myself of like, hey, Emma, things are going to happen and some of the things you can control, but some of these things you can't control. And, you might as well just see that in like a positive way. You might as well assign like the meaning to it, not necessarily that like, oh, everything happens for a reason or everything happens in divine timing. Some people might say that that's not true at all. But I do think that when I take that approach, that's more optimistic and more faithful in a sense, which is another theme of Sagittarius, and just trust that like, hey, this is happening this way because this is the way that it's going to be happening. Um, it helps me to like look at the situation more optimistically. And the irony is that like things have grown in my business so much faster when I'm not always sitting there like wondering why it hasn't happened, which I think some of this also ties into Scorpio energy as well with the concept of control and surrender and just trust. Sagittarius takes that to, I think, a level of like not just trusting and surrendering, but also being optimistic on top of that. So yeah, I would say hopefully I articulated that well enough, but I think that would be like a big example for me that I've kind of been thinking about recently.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that reminds me when somebody said in a song that rather you freak out about it or you have put a good meaning to it, the results are the
Yeah.
same. So you
Mhm.
would rather be optimistic about it?
Yeah. Yeah, because I really do think that like sometimes, yeah, like having a positive attitude about something can result in a certain outcome that maybe you didn't have before, but there are also moments when like it doesn't. um but again, like that's the beauty I think of who we are. Like we have that ability to kind of choose like how we want to look at something, which is
Yeah.
pretty insane. We don't need any outside tool to change our perspective. Like it's just internal, you just do it yourself.
Mm,
Not saying it's going to be easy, by the way, but it can be done and it doesn't require anything other than yourself to do it. So
yeah.
yeah.
And how is everything in the business side? Are you seeing that
Yeah.
optimism right now?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely seeing a lot of like growth and expansion. And I think I have noticed that as I come more into this assuredness and this confidence that I have what it takes to make this happen, and also trusting that external to me, things will work out as they're meant to, or just they'll work out somehow. Um, I've strangely noticed that mirrored in my external reality. Like when the shit is right here, excuse me, when the stuff is right here, the stuff shows externally. You know what I mean? You start to see results of that in your external. And I do feel like at this current time, I'm really starting to see things like pick up, and I'm starting to see like the fruits of this labor that I've been laboring with for or over whatever for like the past few years. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very grateful. Also, like you said, I'm just very grateful for the experience, and it's easier to say now that I'm grateful for the experience because you can see things starting to bear fruit. But yeah, I am ultimately very grateful that I had to learn all this, because the reality is that all the lessons that I learned over the past 3, 4 years are ones that are absolutely essential for me to actually have a business that can grow and then sustain itself.
Hmm.
If I hadn't learned those lessons, it's like, sure, maybe it'll pop and it will be short term, but it won't be long term because I haven't learned certain things that I needed to learn, like the value of patience. You know what I mean? The value of committing to something and to not give up even when you aren't seeing physical results of your efforts. Um, those were things that I really had to learn. So, yeah, overall, very positive.
Wow. I love how you said that because, when I went through my trouble with my, past career, like
Yeah.
that trouble is the foundation of what I have today. And I
Mm.
know I made mistake of, let's say, like giving up too quickly or not
Uh,
responding to people or not following up. Because of that, I'm like, no,
mm,
I know in this career it is so important when you're networking, for example, to follow up with people or whatever it might be. But if I didn't
yeah.
learn that, I wouldn't be where I am today. So all
Yeah.
that hard labor, they're really seated in our foundation.
Hmm.
And yesterday I actually
Yeah.
had an interview with a face reader. So he does professional face
Oh,
reading. I'm sure maybe you've seen videos where they say like, oh, the way your ear is shaped, the way your lips are shaped, it can tell a lot about your personality, just like astrology. So he
yeah.
was telling me, for example, for people who have gone through hard times in their life or the last couple months, let's say you've had a hard breakup, it literally shows in your face, right? You see your
Yeah.
friend who's been sick for 2 weeks, you're like, oh, you look sick. Like literally, how we feel
Sure.
manifests into our physical appearance. That's just a small
Yeah.
basis level.
Yeah.
But he was saying that he can kind of not predict, but like see people who might have like psychopathic or murderous tendencies. And he sees
Oh,
the patterns in, especially their ears, he said. A lot of murderers develop
yes.
certain type of like ear shape, and I'll make a whole video about this.
Wow.
And that just kind of comes to prove that what we feel inside can also manifest in the shapes of our faces. So he did a little bit of face
Wow.
reading on me saying that like if you have higher eyebrows, like I think you too have very high eyebrows
Uh-huh.
compared to where your eyes are, which means that you're very
Right.
open, creative, and curious. But people who have like shorter eye like this can mean that they're a little
Uh-huh.
bit tougher
Sure.
to get to know, and they're very like they want to cut out the bullshit and go straight to the point,
Interesting.
stuff like that. So it was so interesting. So
Wow.
if you see somebody have a glow up, it's exactly like what it means inside. They feel so much better. They're optimistic. Like their life is changing because they changed on the inside.
Yes. Wow, this is so interesting. I'm gonna have to watch that video when you put it out. I love when you do
Hmm.
these ones. Like when you went to the Korean shaman. Oh my gosh, girl. I was like, yes,
Oh
I gotta watch
yeah.
this. But yeah, I love when you do these videos. I'm super excited to hear that. Although one thing that I was thinking when you said that, because I think this is true about astrology as well. Like, let me readjust my seating position for this. Is I think that it's true that, like, for example, astrology is rooted in patterns of observation. Like we've observed these patterns, and because of that, we also see like them reflected in a person in behavior. But I think that I think that astrology can also be reinforced by society. So, for
Mm,
example, actually, I'll use an example with the face thing that you were talking about. You said people with the bigger space between their eye and their eyebrow, curious, open minded, or whatever. And then people who have this shorter distance, maybe more rigid or difficult to get to know, they have a harder time opening up. At the same time, it's like, is that person naturally that way? Or is part of the reason that person is that way because perhaps even just physically the look of that makes other people feel like, oh, I don't want to approach this person.
mm.
You know what I mean? So then they don't. And then it's like, is it really, you know what I mean? Did it originally
Yes.
come from you, or did it come from the way that somebody perceived you and then judge something about your character? Um, I think both are true. You know what I mean? And that's what I think. I think it's like a dance between two where some of it can obviously be true.
Yeah.
Obviously, your physicality is physicality, so obviously it's true because you're staring at it. Um, but I think also the way it's reinforced by your external world and society can also perpetuate that. It's the same thing as sort of like stereotypes.
Mm.
Stereotypes are like, if you behave in a certain way, like you behave in a certain way that fulfills a certain stereotype. it's like, yes, you are doing your part, if you will, to fulfill the stereotype, but also people who might see you and assume or judge automatically that you fit into that stereotype are also part of what contributes to that stereotype being out there in the world. So I think that that's also really an interesting thing. I don't know if there's a way to study that. Like, I don't know if there'd be a way to
Yeah.
separate those two factors. But anyway, I don't know. That's just something like really sitting right here in my mind right now.
That's a great question because I did ask something similar. And because
Yeah.
I asked, how about plastic surgery? If you get plastic surgery, what does that mean? And he
Ah.
was saying that, well, plastic surgery is part of who you are. So if I felt
Mm,
insecure about my nose because of whatever reasons and I change it, well, that actually reflects your personality, the way you changed it, which
sure.
was like an interesting outtake. So you're saying
Yeah.
that, if you grew up in a society where, you were made to feel insecure. Well, my theory would be, well, you might take that, let's say, insecure. So you might really develop like this, but let's say the person next to you has a more optimistic personality. So they don't take that as harsh as person A. So maybe they don't
Sure.
develop that like he said like Tom Cruise has that like eyes. So he's a
Ah.
little bit more like
Interesting.
rigid.
Mm,
So I think it also depends on
interesting.
your personality, how you would take that situation. So you also have to grow up and develop, and your personality changes all
True.
the time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So if you
Interesting.
get plastic surgery, like I did on my nose, it meant that, well, I also want to define myself as, a different Grace. So I changed it.
Mm,
So your inner reflects your outer,
got it.
was his way of explaining it.
Yeah. Sure. I can agree with that. Cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Really interesting. There's
Uh,
so many cool things.
yeah. I went to an Eastern
Yeah.
doctor recently, and I've been going to
Mm,
her for 3 years. And she also does face reading, but not like professionally face reading, but she does
yeah.
do it in an Eastern medical practice, meaning in
Mm.
Eastern medicine, there's different face shape types, which also correlate to not only
Oh.
personality, but your organ size. So she was
Ah.
saying that
Mm.
like Koreans in the past, before the modern Koreans came, have a lot of square faces. And that also means that Koreans can eat a lot of spicy food. But because we
Oh.
stopped eating as much spicy food, our face shape started to change. And of course, other
Oh, wow.
determinations as well, like we believe that slim faces are a bit more aesthetic looking, so we kind of changed. We stopped
Mm.
eating as much spicy food. So even the food you eat determines your face
Yeah.
shape. Stuff
Yeah.
like that is so fascinating.
Wow, that is so interesting. I've always wondered what the shape of my face is. I can never tell, which sounds weird,
You're
but
definitely like V shape, more of a longer.
like
There's
long, right?
definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, there's more characteristics to that. I'm not sure what it
Yeah.
is, but
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. What is your face shape technically?
I think he said it was more of a round in a long form.
Yeah.
Um, we didn't go deep into it, but I have to look at the video
Yeah.
what he said. But he
Mm.
doesn't know my birthday, right? And he was
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, your ear shape, the way that it's like stuck like this, if it's
Uh-huh.
not like coming out,
Right.
it could mean that like you." He said something about me like no, like me able to bounce around different topics. He said that.
Oh.
So I was like, "Whoa, whoa." And you do many
That's really
different things.
funny.
He said something with creativity and things like that. So seems to be
Wow.
pretty not 100%
Uh-huh.
foolproof, but pretty
Sure.
accurate, like astrology.
Yeah. Hmm. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
And if you
Wow.
see people with like
Very cool.
small mouth, right? They
Yeah.
might, or small lips, he said, they might not be inclined to talk about themselves as much and
Mm-hmm.
like to keep secrets. Or if you have big
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
mouth, it's the opposite. Like you're literally a big mouth.
Yes, you're right.
So,
Yeah, I was gonna say it like actually makes sense. Like if you kind of
yeah.
think about it, like the concept of like some people have large mouths and it's like, yeah, use it for something, like talk or something, share some stuff, you know? Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah. Another thing interesting,
Yeah.
he says
Mm.
that like he would notice that a lot of people who are at the end, like people who are contemplating suicide and who actually have gone through suicide, if you see
Uh,
their last days, their lips might get smaller actually because
oh
it
wow.
actually reflects how you're feeling on the inside. So that was also
Wow.
incredible. Like
That
a lot of
is.
powerful men, right? Like leaders like Trump and many others have square faces, which means
Yeah.
also correlates to that, but not all
Mm,
billionaires have square faces.
sure.
But you'll notice, oh, another interesting he said was like, if you go to different regions of the world, like I think he said he went to people in Israel, I think.
Uh-huh.
A lot of women there have stronger noses. Like they're born with that because they have to have this like protection, like the way that you grow up when maybe like if there's war or conflict in your country, that also
Mm,
reflects how a lot of people are born with certain features compared to like the West. We might
sure.
have like softer features because we don't have to deal with war and conflict.
Yeah.
Isn't
It
that
is
crazy?
interesting because I remember that it is like when I was in university and when I had first moved to New York, I remember meeting a lot of like Eastern European or like Russian women who have like a very like even if it's not square, like very angular faces. And
Mm,
it's always so interesting to me how if you look at like even the climate of where they come from and the background and like the culture of like say Russia, for example, like I'm thinking of one girl in particular that I know who's a very angular face. Even her body was very like I don't know how to describe it. Like, but it almost mirrored like the harshness that is
yeah.
Russia, you know, and the it was just so interesting to me. So yeah, honestly, I'm sure there's something to it. Even this idea of like I know this isn't maybe quite the same thing, but what you said earlier about what you eat can change your face shape. Even
Hmm.
this knowing now that like when you eat a lot of sugar, it like puffs up your face and makes it like more round and appearing more like bloated and
Mm,
inflated, like uncomfortably like you know.
hmm.
Um So yeah, it would be interesting to see like if people who consume more sugar or diets higher in like carbs or sugar or something like experience that or you know higher in fat or something. I don't know.
Mm. Um, the thing that the Eastern doctor, she said that was that a lot of like people who have like very round faces, which
Mm.
correlates to actually a lot of Chinese people who have more of a rounder, like you said, a bit
Mm,
of a not bloated, but like a rounder shape to them. That could also
yeah.
correlate to money. That's why a lot of Chinese
Mm-hmm.
people, have this very connections to making a lot of money.
Yeah.
So even money
Interesting.
shows up in their
Yeah.
faces. That's crazy.
Yeah. I had heard one time somebody say, and everything that I'm saying is not like actually verified by an Eastern medicine doctor, like what you're saying, but also that like a puffy face or whatever can also indicate like beauty and youth, which like I guess kind of makes sense because like the reality of it is, you know, kids have that the
Yeah.
youthfulness is like that fullness in the cheeks, which is so funny because so many people nowadays try to get like plastic surgery to like take off like fat in their cheeks or you know whatever and this and that and yeah, it's always so interesting to me how like other people might perceive that fat there as like a positive thing or you know a de- destiny for looking youthful even when you're old or
Hmm.
something like that. I don't know though. I've nothing verified, like I said. So
Yeah, I think in Asia, you consider fat to be more useful. And in the West,
uh,
it seems like taking out the
yeah,
fat, especially in the face,
definitely.
is like a new
Hmm.
trend,
Yeah,
which is also interesting. Yeah. But
yeah,
I don't know. I
yeah,
feel like universally, though, having fat and like having that volume would
yeah,
equal to youth eventually. So
yeah.
once you become like your
Sure.
40s and 50s, if you do take out the fat, you're going to look probably 23, 30 years older than you actually
Right.
are.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Like you don't notice it when you're young, but when you're older.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the last points that I want to touch up on Sagittarius is traveling because
Yeah.
it's a very interesting quality about Sag. And this year I've actually traveled the most, I feel like, than I did in the past. Like I've went on tours with K-pop group, I've traveled a lot with my friends, I've unexpectedly went to Puerto Rico to meet my friend. It's not like me. And I love traveling, who doesn't?
Mm,
But I think you just learn so much from traveling and meeting new
mhm.
people, and it just opens up the perspective of who
Yeah.
you are and learning different
Right.
cultures. So I really appreciated traveling this year.
Yeah. What's your favorite like trip that you went on for whatever reason?
Oh, the favorite trip. I think each trip, I don't have a favorite.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm like, you know what? I already know what you're gonna say because you already said it earlier. You're like, you can't pick one. There's value in everything.
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean,
so
everyone was, let me just try to think. I think, I mean, if I had to pick, Thailand would have been like the funnest for me.
mm,
But
okay.
the first place I went this year, I think, was Italy, which was crazy because
Oh
it's
yeah,
already end of the year. But I went in
crazy.
March, and that was like the first trip that I went with, the girls. It was just eye-opening, crazy experience. And then I think I went to Vegas, which was a crazy experience on its own. And then I went to
Yeah,
tour with like all different cities, which was also a crazy experience. Met a lot of people, knew what I can take and what was like my capacity of work. and
Yeah.
like who I can work with and not. So that
Sure.
was a cool experience. I went to Puerto
Yeah.
Rico, which was amazing,
Wow.
Korea, Thailand. But Thailand was beautiful. That was like
Yeah.
highlights. Yeah.
Wow, you really did do a lot of traveling this year, actually, now that I think about it too. You really did.
Yeah, which is crazy. I mean,
Wow.
I don't know if this is like prediction or not, but I had two psychics last year tell me, "Oh,
Yeah.
you're gonna travel a lot in 2024." But then,
Yeah.
did I travel a lot? Like, what is a lot in their mind versus my mind? Like, a lot is like every month, every 2 weeks, but maybe
Hmm.
not. I don't know.
It's funny because when you were just listing all those places, that was what I was thinking about. I was like, it's funny how like you had those psychics tell you that you were gonna
Yeah.
travel. I feel like a lot could also be like maybe a lot for you, since they're reading like your
Hmm.
energy, it could be like you're gonna travel a lot according to
That's
like
true.
your standards. Because you did just say like to how much you usually would travel, this was
Hmm.
like more than usual. Um, that is really, really interesting. I
Yeah,
wonder
but
what's
I
gonna
didn't.
happen next year.
Yeah, I didn't travel in
Go ahead.
November or December, so is that a lot? I don't know. So it's like
Every month.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess I feel like comparatively speaking, what the year before, 2023, I know I had just kind of like just met you, but
Oh my God, we
I don't think
did. It's
you
1 year ago.
yeah, like I don't think that you had really traveled that as much, like quite as much. Even if you didn't travel November, December, like you spent a lot of time this past year traveling. And I would know because I didn't really go anywhere this year. Like I
Oh,
travel was not really a thing that I did. I don't say that in like a woe is me. I say that like cuz I know I had stuff to do here. But I definitely know you were traveling a lot cuz I was not traveling.
yeah. So you're
Yeah.
Sag moon, right? So you're
Yeah.
supposed to work on your moon signs, is what I know.
What do you mean?
Like if I'm an Aries moon and you're Sag, like we're
Uh,
supposed to work on Aries and you're supposed to work on like the
oh, yeah,
Sag
yeah.
characteristics.
Yes, like fulfilling and embodying the energies of Aries and Sagittarius will make us feel specifically because it's moon more fulfilled. So for you it's things like being daring and brave and courageous and fearless and not being afraid to like just go out there and like take action on whatever it is that you want to be taking action on, whatever it is that feels like in your heart like something that you are passionate about.
Mm.
Because passion is one of the characteristics of all fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. It's passion, vitality, vigor, like it's life force energy. It's the stuff that gives us the spark, desire, motivation to take action, to do, or to express, or to learn, or travel. That's all domain of fire. So, um, like travel for me is something that is exciting, but like creativity is also another fire sign element. And I've noticed that when I have things in my life that allow me to be creative, because like I said, I also have other things in Sagittarius as well, just like you have other things in Aries, or you have Mars in Aries also. It's like I feel fulfilled, like more fulfilled and more satisfied emotionally in my life when I have creative projects that I'm working on. Another thing that's like really random is Aries also is the sign that rules conflict. And so sometimes, like, I'm not suggesting this per se, but I know I've mentioned before that like some people who are Aries dominant, they're like boxers. And it's because they thrive almost in a weird way when they're in this state of conflict, but not conflict that is gonna like like gonna hurt somebody, where they're like like war or something. I'm not saying we should be doing that, but like they are boxers, or
It's
they're doing
necessary.
MMA, or yeah, because and it's a sport. I mean, people clearly love it. You know what I mean? Like it's a sport. It's something that they both get enjoyment out of, and it gets them to be in that energy in somewhat of a safe space. Instead of going out there and causing like some destruction that's not even consented to. um
Interesting.
so even doing stuff like that, where it's like it gets you into like a little bit of like that daring energy or risk taking, like doing stuff like, I don't know if you're even interested because other things could be in your chart influencing this, but like doing adventure sports and like skydiving and trying out like drag racing cars. I don't know, like some people really love that stuff, but it doesn't have to be like I'm saying, it doesn't have to be that. um
So is
so
Mike
yeah,
Tyson Aries, you think?
I don't know. That's a great question. I never looked up his chart. I
That's
can look it
so,
up right now, though.
yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna
Or
look it
maybe
up
he has a
while you're
lot of
talking.
Aries in his chart. Like you said, the nightlife people, there's a lot of Scorpio, not necessarily sun, but in somewhere in their charts. So That's so
Yeah.
interesting you say when it comes to daring sports, a lot of people might be Aries.
Right. Let me see. Okay, if this is accurate. See, I don't know if this is accurate. So,
Mm.
because it says on the thing, this accuracy is poor.
Oh.
He actually is a Cancer.
Mm.
Um, he doesn't have anything in Aries, but he has a moon in Sagittarius, Mercury in Leo, rising in Leo, and he also has, I think, Uranus and Pluto in the first house of Aries. So that's another way, for example, that like you could embody certain types of like Aries energy is you don't have anything in Aries, but you have a ton of stuff in the first house, which is the house of Aries. He doesn't have a ton of stuff there, but because he has that like fire in his chart, I think that naturally
Mm.
contributes to that. Although Leo, to be fair, isn't usually combative like that. The irony is actually Cancer, Sun in Cancer actually can be quite the fighter. Um, Despite very popular misconception that it's just like a homemaker, Cancer is. I remember when I had been learning about astrology, the person that I was learning from told me that one of the signs you can see the most in the military is actually Cancer, because
Mm.
Cancer is very much prefers to like not be aggressive, not do any fighting if it doesn't need to. But if it is ever called to in the name of protection, you'll see like a whole other side of Cancer. And she
Mm.
gave this example, the woman, the astrology teacher, she gave this example of how if you go to a park and you go up to a random woman's child and you hit the child, you try to harm the child, you'll see a woman who might be sitting very casually over with her coffee and her book, all of a sudden like get up and this rage comes out of her, right? Out of a desire to protect her child. And you'll start to see this like angry woman or a woman who's willing to like fight you. Because protection is their main game, and that's the same thing with the military. You know what they're protecting is their homeland, is their country. It's something that feels important to them in some regard, and so when there's no
Mm.
other choice, even on a more literal level, especially in like the military, you're protecting yourself, like your own life, your life and the lives of
Mhm.
your you know fellow infantrymen. So um it actually doesn't surprise me at all that he's a Cancer, but he would still have that type of energy. Um, but yeah, you can be like a risk taking person and not just be an Aries. Like fire
Yeah.
is known to be an element that is more risk taking than say water. But again, I think like you shouldn't bind yourself by the astrology. You know what I mean? Like if you're a risk taking person, but in your chart there's not any fire, it's okay. You know what I mean? Don't worry about it. There might be something else that shows you why you are, or maybe that's just a quality of your personality that you gathered or gained through like nurture instead of like the nature of the astrology, the environment you grew up in or something. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. And Sag, today's topic is a fire sign as well. So you
Yes.
guys are very fiery too, in a different way.
Yeah. In a different way. And I wanted to just add one more thing to that for anybody that's listening that is a Sagittarius or has friends or kids maybe that are Sag. One of the things that's really so great about Sagittarius is it is larger than life. It's ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is all about like expanding and growing everything that it touches. It also is like correlated with, I'm pretty sure, the mythology, like Zeus character. And one of the ways that you can see this play out is like Zeus is this, god who's larger than life. He's larger than humans, larger than mortality or whatever. But he was also known to be a womanizer, someone who just slept with all these different ladies or whatever, and he was overindulgent in that way. So that is another side of Sagittarius, is it can be a little bit overindulgent or very, like I said, very righteous. Like it believes that it is God. You know what I mean? Like it's like above somehow everyone else, or that one way of believing or whatever is above everything else. Um so those are maybe some touchy, like things to not like work on, but kind of like become aware of. But on the bright side, like I said, it expands everything that it touches, and this includes like positivity. So one of Sagittarius's greatest traits, in my opinion, is the ability to be encouraging and the
Mm.
ability to empower other people through offering genuine, the key here is genuine encouragement. So I've noticed that when I'm doing these astro dice readings for clients, that when I start my reading with like, here's the problem to be overcame, But here is like a piece of encouragement about this energy, about who you are, that's going to help you get through this. The readings land so much better than me just saying like, here's the problem, you got to work on perfectionism or something like that, and then like, okay, that's it. And that gives people, it makes them feel empowered, it makes them feel encouraged to actually be able to do something about this problem over here. So yeah, that's another thing. I'm sorry I kind of took the long route to get there, but the point that I'm trying to make is encouragement is a skill of fire signs in general, but especially I think Sagittarius is a really great like sign to offer that.
I love that. Well,
Yeah.
thank you guys so much for watching. That was the episode on Sagittarius. Let us know how you relate to this sign this season. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys next time.
Yay. Bye.
Time